I used to rent this tiny studio apartment in Chicago right after I graduated college. Nothing special at all, just a one-room place tucked on the top floor of a three-story building. I picked it because the rent was cheap, close to work, and honestly, I was broke. At 23, with student loans hanging over me and zero savings, I didn't have the privilege of being picky. The place was simple, but it felt like mine. Clean, quiet, and just enough for me. The only window faced a narrow alley with another building staring right back at me. The alley was so tight you could barely squeeze a car through it. During the day, it felt dim, like sunlight didn't even bother trying to reach down there.
But at night, it turned into pure darkness. Not the kind of darkness you forget about either, the heavy kind that presses against the glass. It never really bothered me, though. At the time, I was working late nights bartending up on the north side, so most nights I didn't even get home until 2:30 or 3 in the morning. I'd throw something together to eat, scroll on my phone, and crash out. Then one night, about a month after moving in, I noticed something. Something I couldn't explain. I had just walked in, kicked off my shoes, and flipped on the light when I caught something in the corner of my eye. The window across the alley, something shifted, just for a split second, like a curtain twitching. My chest tightened, and I froze, staring. But when I looked again, it was still dark, empty. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a draft, and tried to laugh it off. But the next night, it happened again. The second the lights came on, the curtain moved. This time I saw it clearly, a hand, pale in the glow, pulling the fabric back just enough to peek through before vanishing. Behind that window, nothing but blackness. Someone was there, watching. What really got under my skin was the fact that I had never once seen the lights on in that apartment. Not once. I honestly thought it was empty, maybe abandoned. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing that pale hand in my mind, pulling back the curtain, hiding in the dark. Over the next week, I started watching more closely. And sure enough, every single night the same thing happened. The second I turned on my lights, the curtain across the alley would shift. It was subtle, almost careful, but impossible to miss. A slow parting, just enough for me to glimpse the blackness inside before closing again. I even tested it. Some nights I'd sit in silence with all my lights off, staring at that window. Nothing. But the moment I flipped on even the smallest lamp, the curtain would move, as if whoever was there had been waiting for me. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, maybe just someone with a weird habit. But the timing was too perfect, too deliberate. Every movement matched mine. And deep down, I knew the truth. Someone was watching me. I finally asked my landlord about the unit across the alley, and he swore it had been empty for months. No tenants, no lights, nothing. I pushed, wondering if maybe someone moved in quietly, but he just laughed and said I was paranoid. That made my skin crawl even more. I thought about calling the cops, but what could I even say? That someone in a vacant apartment was watching me? There was no proof, only a sick feeling that got heavier every single night. One night, things went from creepy to terrifying. I got home later than usual, around 4 a.m., drained from a long shift. As I slid my key into the lock, I noticed something wedged in the doorframe. I thought it was just a flyer, but when I pulled it out, my stomach dropped. It was a crumpled piece of paper with one word scrawled in pen. Hey. My hands shook. The first thought that hit me was the window across the alley. Heart pounding, I rushed to look. The curtain was shut tight. No movement, just silence that felt heavier than ever. In full panic, I called my friend Jamie. She lived across town but told me to come over right away. I shoved a few things into a backpack and bolted. The next day, still shaken, I marched to my landlord and demanded he open the unit across the alley. He hesitated, which made my skin crawl even more, but finally agreed. When the door creaked open, the place was cold, dusty, and completely empty. No furniture, no signs of life. But in the back room, right in front of the window facing mine, sat a single metal folding chair, perfectly placed, waiting. Someone had been inside an apartment that was supposed to be locked and vacant, watching me every night. The police came and searched the place. They dusted for prints, but nothing ever came back. Knowing my paranoia was right the whole time made me sick. I kept wondering how long that person had been sitting there, just staring at me night after night. I packed my things and moved out that same week. To this day, I still don't know who it was, how they got in, or how long it would have continued if I hadn't found that note. Sometimes I think about the landlord, but I know it couldn't have been him. He would have cleared the chair before showing me the unit. Still, That image sticks in my head. That chair, that window, and even now, years later, I'll wake up in the dark with the same heavy feeling that somewhere out there, someone is still watching me. When I was 12, my family moved out to a rural part of Oregon, far from the nearest town. Our new home sat on a big stretch of land, surrounded by endless pine trees. At first, it felt peaceful, almost too quiet, like the whole world had forgotten us. The house itself was old, built in the 1940s, and it had all the things you'd expect from a place that old. Creaky floors, a dusty attic, and a worn-down shed about 30 feet behind the back door. That shed was stuffed with rusty tools and random junk left behind by the last owner. My dad always said he'd clean it out, but he never got around to it. Honestly, we mostly stayed away from it. Then one night, close to midnight, I was hiding under the covers with a fleshlight, lost in a book, when Max, our golden retriever, started barking like crazy. He was usually the friendliest dog, but when he barked like that, it meant something was seriously wrong. I slipped out of bed and peeked through the window. Max was locked on the shed, barking into pure darkness. The motion light above the back door glowed, throwing long, shaky shadows across the yard. I didn't see anyone, but Max wouldn't let up. I stood there frozen, just watching, until he finally quieted down. The next morning, we saw them, deep boot prints in the dirt between our house and the shed. My dad brushed it off, said it was probably a neighbor or some drifter, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. Max barking at that shed in the dead of night, us looking out and finding nothing, but always those footprints. They started and ended at the shed, never leading away. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke to the crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside my window. I froze in place, listening as they stopped, then started again, this time heading straight for the shed. I slowly peeked through the blinds, just as the motion light by the back door flicked on. For a brief second, I saw him, a tall man in a filthy gray coat, standing right at the shed door. His face was hidden in the shadows, and then the light clicked off, leaving him swallowed by darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I stumbled back and woke my parents. My dad grabbed his rifle and rushed outside, but the man was gone. The only proof left behind were fresh footprints leading right up to the shed. This time, my dad went inside. He cut the lock, pulled the doors open, and found nothing but rusty tools and dusty tarps. He put on a new lock and reinforced the doors. For a while, everything went quiet, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. A month later, Max disappeared. We searched the woods, the road, even asked neighbors, but he was just gone. I was crushed, still hoping he'd come back. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind stuck on the shed, on Max and that man I'd seen. Around 3 in the morning, the back door creaked open. My stomach dropped. I slipped out of bed and crept into the hallway, and there was my dad, already awake, gripping his rifle tight, his eyes fixed on the dark. We rushed to the back door just as the motion light snapped on, and there he was again, standing by the shed. But this time, he wasn't empty-handed. In one hand, he held a knife. In the other, Max's collar. My whole body went cold, like the air had been sucked out of me. My dad shouted and raised his rifle, but the man bolted into the woods before he could fire. We called the police, and they searched for hours, but there was no sign of him anywhere. What the police actually found inside the shed still makes me sick to think about. The floor had been cleared, and in the dirt were strange carvings, symbols and crude, unsettling images scratched deep into the ground. In one corner was a pile of bones. Animal bones, I prayed, though even saying that didn't bring comfort. But the worst part came when they discovered a hidden panel in the wall. Behind it was a backpack stuffed with things that weren't ours. Old wallets, broken watches, and pieces of worn-out clothing. Belongings that must have once been carried by other people. More than one. Then came the most disturbing find. A notebook. Its pages were filled with messy handwriting, strange symbols, incoherent ramblings, and twisted drawings of houses, families, and eyes. To me, it felt like a message.
like he was telling us we weren't the first and we wouldn't be the last, that he had been watching us just as he had watched others before. The police collected everything, but that feeling of being hunted never really left. That night, while we were packing to leave, I glanced out my bedroom window one last time toward the shed. The yellow police tape fluttered quietly in the breeze, and for a second it felt over. But then, just beyond it, maybe 10 feet into the tree line, I saw a face, clear as day, someone watching. The moment I blinked, it was gone. I screamed for my dad, panicked, yelling that he was back. My dad rushed in, grabbed his rifle, and tore outside, screaming into the dark and firing into the trees. His anger was explosive, raw, like all the fear and frustration had finally boiled over. And honestly, I understood, because what's worse than being forced out of your own home by some twisted stranger who probably killed your dog? Days later, we packed up for good and moved to a less remote part of Oregon. But I'll never forget that night, or the feeling of those eyes watching us from the woods. In the summer of 2018, a group of us, Abby, Marcus, his younger brother Tim, Tim's girlfriend Hannah, and me, planned a weekend escape to the Blue Ridge Mountains. We were all in our early 20s, fresh out of college, desperate to unplug and breathe for a while. We chose a spot way off the grid, buried deep inside the national park, where the trees stood tall and close, the air smelled like pine and wet earth, and your phone turned useless the moment you got there. The first night was perfect. We hiked in with our backpacks, set up camp near a quiet lake, and built a fire. Hot dogs, marshmallows, laughter, and stories under a sky so full of stars it felt unreal. The forest was silent, calm, almost comforting. But when the second night came, that calm started to twist into something else, something that didn't feel right. Around 11 that night, we were still laughing by the fire when Marcus suddenly froze, his eyes locked on the tree line. He pointed and whispered if we saw it too. We turned, but the woods looked empty. He swore he'd seen someone, tall, moving quick, ducking behind a tree maybe 40 yards away. Tim brushed it off, saying it was probably a deer, but 20 minutes later, the sharp crack of a stick echoed from the same spot. This time it was loud enough to silence all of us. Abby's face went pale, and she admitted she didn't feel safe. We agreed to end the night, put out the fire, and crawled into our tents, but the silence that followed felt heavier than ever. That night, I woke to a sound that still chills me to this day. Breathing. Slow, heavy breathing coming from just outside my tent, no more than 10 feet from where my head rested. At first I told myself I was half dreaming, caught between sleep and reality, but it didn't fade. It stayed, steady and deliberate, like whoever it was wanted me to hear it. I tried to convince myself it could have been one of my friends stepping out to pee, but there was no stream, no footsteps, just the rasp of someone struggling for air. It sounded older, like a lifelong smoker catching his breath. My hand shook as I reached for my flashlight, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it on. The breathing circled slowly from one side of the tent to the other, dragging the air with it until it stopped dead. The silence pressed against me, and for a moment I felt relief. Maybe it really was one of my friends. I lay still, not daring to speak, and eventually sleep dragged me under, though deep down I knew something was wrong. The next morning I kept quiet, and so did Abby. But when we sat down for breakfast, Marcus looked restless, like he had been waiting to speak. He finally said he heard someone outside our tent last night. Hannah quickly agreed, adding that whoever it was circled the tents more than once, and it might have been more than one person. My stomach dropped. I asked if maybe it was just one of us going out to pee. Tim admitted he did, but then said he spotted a figure crouched near the fire pit around 4 in the morning. That's when we all decided to check the area. What we found made my blood run cold. Clear footprints surrounded all 3 tents, but in one patch of soft mud, there was no boot print, no sneaker tread, just the outline of a bare human foot. The tracks led straight into the woods and then disappeared. We tried to laugh it off, calling it some weird hiker or a prank, but none of us really believed it. That night, we built a bigger fire and kept our flashlights close, talking nervously to cover the tension. Around 2 in the morning, the sound came back, the slow crunch of leaves, heavier this time. Then a voice, low, almost mumbling, too quiet to make out, but it was definitely human. Marcus snapped his flashlight toward the trees, and in that flash, we saw him. A man, completely naked, crouched low behind a tree, his pale skin glowing in the beam. The second the light hit, he bolted, scrambling back into the woods like some animal caught in the open. We sat frozen, hearts racing, realizing the truth. Someone had been watching us all along.
We were too shaken to split up and crawl into the tents, so we huddled by the fire, all 5 of us clinging to the small comfort of being together. Hannah begged us to pack up and leave, but Marcus and I knew it was impossible. Hiking out at 2 in the morning through miles of dark forest wasn't just dangerous, it was terrifying. The thought of that man trailing behind us, watching every step, was worse. So we stayed, the fire crackling low, our flashlights in hand, every sound in the woods making our hearts jump. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep, not even for a second. And maybe that saved me, or at least my things, because what happened by morning proved we were never alone out there. I don't know how many hours had crawled by before I heard it. A stick snapping in the distance, the faint crunch of leaves underfoot. My heart jumped, and I whispered, "Please let it be a deer." For a moment, there was silence, the kind that squeezes your chest. Then, a voice came from the woods, low and steady. "I see you guys." It wasn't any of my friends. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end, but none of the others reacted. Maybe they were asleep. Maybe they were too scared to admit they heard it too. Then came something worse. My tent shifted just slightly, and the zipper began to slide down, inch by inch. I shot upright, staring, my throat locked until I let out a scream so loud it tore through the night. My friends erupted too, screaming from their tent, the whole campsite in chaos. Whoever had been outside tore off into the woods. I never saw them, but I know they were there. We shouted to each other through the thin fabric, terrified, until I zipped my tent back up. After that, there were no more footsteps, no more breathing, just silence. But it was the kind of silence that doesn't calm you. It only makes you wonder if the eyes in the dark are still there, waiting. I never slept a minute that night. I just laid there, eyes wide, waiting for the sun to finally rise. When the first light broke through the trees, we didn't waste time. We packed our gear in silence and started the long hike back to the car, the tension hanging over us like a weight. At the ranger station, we told them everything. The ranger listened, nodding slowly, then said we weren't the first. There had been reports of men, maybe more than one, living deep in those woods. Some said they stole food, gear, anything they could find. Others hinted at worse, but he didn't explain and we didn't dare ask. On the drive home, we tried to laugh it off, but it wasn't really funny. The truth is, I'll never forget that voice, that zipper moving on its own. And I don't think I'll ever go camping again, because once you know what it feels like to be watched, really watched, the forest never feels the same.